so hello everybody. It's just nice to see you. Thank you for being here tonight, and thank you as well for rescheduling the date and just being here. So my name is Silvia. I am a plant-based candle maker. I'm a meditation teacher, and I'm also a trauma-informed practitioner in training. So I'm currently studying to become a somatic practitioner, which means that I mainly work with lovely humans on our physiology, our organs. We work with nervous system regulation based as well on developmental events in our life. So mainly I work with developmental trauma. I will explain more about it, but I don't just work on a cognitive level, but I work a lot on our somatic awareness, so our body awareness. Obviously today we're going to talk about nervous system healing, so all things nervous system related in terms of becoming more emotionally resilient and kind of expanding and increasing our capacity to deal with our stressors in our life, with challenges that comes in our ways in life, and how we can deal in a much healthier way. So before we start, just a few things that I always like to acknowledge. First of all, you're very welcome here. All parts of you are welcome here. If you would like to keep the camera on because you feel like you are feeling more connected to the space and to the others, then feel free to do so, but please don't feel forced to keep the camera on if you don't feel comfortable. And also, just because I work a lot with the body, I kind of want to acknowledge that if you notice that you start to feel a little bit fidgety and you kind of want to move and you feel a bit of a charge and a bit of energy, just remember that, you know, you can always get up, go and get a glass of water, walk around your space, and then come back. So you don't feel obliged to just stay glued to the screen all the time, almost like if we're at school or anything like that. Kind of attune to what you're feeling at the moment and what you need. Cool. Okay. So before we start, I always like to do a little body sensations check-in, just to ground ourselves a little bit. So yeah, wherever you are, just get comfortable, whether you're sitting or standing or lying down, it just really doesn't matter. And so initially, I like you to just start noticing your environment. Just start noticing your environment. So kind of start noticing room, any objects, any colors, any shapes, something that you're just drawn to, and notice, bring a little bit of curiosity to it. Just imagine almost like a child or a baby being curious about exploring, seeing different colors. Perhaps it's the texture, perhaps it's the shape as well. Just without thinking about it too much, but kind of like getting curious about it. And if you feel drawn to kind of with your body to move towards that object or whatever it is that caught your attention, just feel free to walk towards it. And then while you do that, start noticing the contact of your feet to the ground, or perhaps if you're sitting, notice the contact of your sitting bone to the surface beneath you. Yeah, and just simply just notice what it feels like, whether your feet are firmly planted to the ground, perhaps you're moving your toes. And just start noticing if there are any sensations in your body. Perhaps you're feeling heat. And if you do feel some heat or maybe cold, just notice where you feel it. Maybe you feel some heat in your face. Maybe you feel heat in your heart space or stomach. Or if you feel any buzzing, tingling sensations. Or maybe you just don't feel anything, and that's fine as well. Whatever it is, that's cool. Just bring in some curiosity. Yeah. Yeah, and you're more than welcome to share. Of course, the chat is open. So if you would like to share anything in particular, you're more than welcome to. And now just start noticing your breath without trying to change the way you're breathing right now. Just simply notice your breath. Simply just notice the expansion of your rib cage. Noticing a little bit of activation when you breathe in, and then relaxing in the breathing out. Yeah. Yeah, now just see and notice if you can notice your breath and the contact of your body to the surface beneath you at the same time. And just really noticing the shape of your body and the flow of your breath. And you're more than welcome. You can keep your eyes open. You can keep your eyes closed. Just remember here, you are attuning to what feels good for you in the moment. There is no right or wrong, just what feels good for you. Yeah, and whenever you're ready, you feel free to come back to your space. Maybe you want to orient again around your room, kind of bringing yourself back to presence, back to the room. Yeah, and just notice whether there was a little shift from the beginning to now. Perhaps the shift is really subtle. And sometimes it just starts with just notice any bodily sensations and notice our breath. Cool. Okay, so I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. So if you just give me a second, I've got a presentation here. There you go. Okay, so let me see if I can present it right now. Okay, can you all see it fine? I hope so. Awesome, amazing. Okay, so today we're gonna talk about nervous system healing and emotional resilience, which essentially is understanding our state, understanding our emotional state from a body perspective, from a somatic perspective. Because sometimes things happen in our life, challenges and stressors and things kind of get thrown at us. And sometimes it's very hard to talk things out of, you know, of getting out of that specific state. And sometimes it's a little hard to understand it and process it just on a cognitive level. And sometimes it's much needed to kind of slowly come back to our sensations and to our feelings in our body, and knowing how to come out of perhaps an anxious state just by simply attuning to what our body needs at that moment. And then when we feel a little bit more calm and regulated, and then when we feel a bit more calm and present, then we can start processing it a little bit more on a cognitive level. So, okay. So what is our nervous system? You've probably heard of it. I'm sure you've heard of it before. especially when it comes to talking about autonomic nervous system, which is essentially, it starts in all of the functions of our autonomic nervous system start and happen in our brain stem, which is essentially that part of the brain right at the back of our head, which is also in conjunction with our spinal cord. But essentially, our nervous system is the operating system of our body. So imagine it being like this operating team that comes and help you when you're feeling in danger, when you're feeling stressed, when you're feeling anxious, when there is a perceived threat as well, or even when you just feel joyful and you want to connect. That is still your operating system come into place to just help you and just help your body. And it controls so many different things. Obviously, the main one is it controls our heart rate, it controls our digestive system, our respiration and the way we breathe. It controls our cardiovascular system, our sexual arousal, etc. So just think about it as these kind of, as this team that controls so many different systems in our body. And usually when we learn how to work and regulate our nervous system and we heal our nervous system, then most of the time all of the other systems in our body heal. So when we talk about autonomic nervous system, again, you've probably heard of it before, but the autonomic nervous system is responsible to sometimes detect whether we're feeling safe or whether there is a threat and there is danger, which is a very primal way of our body to either put us into fighting and attack and running away from threat. So if you think about like what animals do most of the time, like lions come into attack, or sometimes the autonomic nervous system also helps us to feeling calm and then going into our rest and digest. So if you think about, so these are very exaggerated ways, but how sometimes I like to think about it is that our autonomic nervous system kind of divides into these two branches. One branch is called the sympathetic nervous system, and the other branch is the parasympathetic nervous system. So you might have heard of fight, flight, freeze response, but essentially the fight and flight response is part of our sympathetic nervous system. So the fight is when we are either ready to fight because there is an actual threat, there is danger, so we're ready to attack. And flight is when we are ready to run away and get out of that threat. And there is enough mobilization in our body to do so. But if you think about it on a day-to-day level, how a very nicely regulated nervous system works is that we wake up, we get out of bed, and for example, we start doing 10 jumping jacks. So where the wave goes up, that is our sympathetic nervous system, because we put ourselves into mobilization. So we start to feel energy, and then therefore we start to move and activate with our day. Then obviously when we decide to kind of rest, and perhaps it's been a long day and we finally decide to relax, then our nervous system goes down, and it goes down into what is called parasympathetic nervous system. So the rest and digest. So I'm gonna explain a little bit more soon in details what is it like to be in a fight or flight and freeze response exactly, and why it is so important to understand these states in our day-to-day life, and why sometimes it can impact us in the way we perceive ourselves in the way we step or don't step into towards what we truly desire, and also the way we do relational healing, the way we deal with relationships, the way we deal with other people, because often it is a connection from nervous system to nervous system. So so when we feel unhappy or anxious, or we feel a little bit stuck, or perhaps we go into a bit of a more depressive state, we experience painful relational challenges, we need to take in consideration the underlying cause of these symptoms, which is often unresolved trauma stuck in the body. Unresolved trauma is experienced as a dysregulated nervous system. And this is why often it's not talked about it as much. And this is why I say that you can't always think about it on a cognitive level, is because these symptoms are very primal. And if you only process it on a cognitive level, you might understand it in a safe space with someone in that moment. But if you don't learn to understand what the different states of your nervous system are, such as fight, flight, and freeze, and where is the trigger and when you get activated and how you come out of that state, then it continuously repeats. And it's going to be very hard for us to finally bringing ourselves back into presence, because our internal system, our internal state doesn't feel safe. And when we talk about trauma, we mainly talk about either developmental trauma or shock trauma. So I mainly work with clients who had developmental trauma. Most of us in some forms, I would say, 98% of people had some forms of developmental trauma. What is developmental trauma? It's essentially, if we think about events, and sometimes they're, instead of having a big T as in trauma, but almost like this kind of micro traumatic events that we experienced in our early platform development. It could be such as emotional neglect from our parents. It could be emotional abuse or physical abuse, and it was repeated in our, during our childhood, or maybe even during our teenage years. It could be perhaps emotional inconsistency as well from our parents or caregivers. Sometimes maybe one of our parent or caregiver was going to work, and because perhaps we were a little sensitive already as kids, then we started to feel a bit abandoned, I feel a bit neglected. Maybe there wasn't enough emotional attunement for us to feel safe. Maybe we lived in a very unsafe and chaotic environment. Therefore, we had to do everything we could to survive. So as children, we had to find so many different coping strategies to survive and trying to get out of that state. Or maybe sometimes it wasn't safe enough to run from the threat. Maybe sometimes we weren't even allowed to be ourselves. Maybe sometimes we weren't allowed to be angry, because feeling, expressing anger was dangerous, because perhaps the caregiver or the parent would actually attack us, whether emotionally or physically. Maybe there was a form of not feeling safe. Therefore, we had to shut down and repress some of our life force energy, and we had to repress some forms of ourselves in order to survive. So that is essentially what is developmental trauma. Shock trauma is a little bit different, because shock trauma is, it could be an accident, it could be a big event that happened just once, and although if there is a decent amount of regulation and safety into place already in your life, in your system, when you go through shock trauma, it's a little bit easier once you process it and you work through it to come out of that, because you already have a decent amount of regulation and safety, and I'm talking about internal safety as well, into place. With developmental trauma is a little different because it's repetitive. And to be honest, if it happens once, it will continue to happen. And it's often related as well to relationship attachment wounds with whoever older person was there to take care of us. So if there was an attachment rupture and there wasn't enough repair to help us feel safe and understand who we were in the world, then that is, of course, a form of developmental trauma. I'm gonna get a sip of water. Okay, so sometimes, just to make it clear, trauma is not exactly what happens or what happened to us, but it's the overwhelm of stimulation in our bodies as the result of an event or experience that is too much. So it happened too much and too soon for a system to process. So it's not what happened to us, but it's how our nervous system responds to it. So this is what I'm saying. It's, you know, if it's repetitive and it's how we respond to it. So whether it was through fighting back and attacking, or whether it's through running away from danger, or whether we just couldn't do any of those, and we just had to just being alone in a room without anyone who could take care of us or explain to us what happened, you know, our nervous system gets a little sensitive. And that's how we start to develop this nervous system dysregulation. And how, of course, this dysregulation, then it changes our internal state. It changes our internal physiology. So this means as well that our body starts to function differently. And this is why often if unresolved, stored trauma is not discharged, that energy is not discharged from our body, it stays within the body. And that's where we start noticing, for example, not just anxiety or depression, but also irritable bowel syndrome, chronic disease, Crohn's disease, and different other illnesses that obviously are caused by inflammation in the body because of a dysregulated nervous system, and because our organs stop functioning properly because of that. And again, as I said before, our nervous system regulates a lot of the, you know, the main functions of our body. So when we heal our nervous system, we also heal our digestive system, our cardiovascular system, our respiratory system. So obviously when it becomes, you know, when things are not resolved from a body perspective, sometimes too much inflammation then of course can cause you know, to the lines of like cancer and things like this. So these are important things to consider when it comes to healing ourselves and taking care of our mental state and our body. And what I was talking about before is the fact that developmental trauma doesn't just start from our birth and from our early platform, so our childhood, but it actually starts from conception. So when you think about your parents thinking about having a child and thinking about having you, that is where your true self starts to develop, which is essentially your true self is just simply who you are. All parts of you are welcome. It's just who you are, this innocent being who just then starts to form this very, genuine sense of self, who wants to step into the things that you desire the most. And that's how you start to develop your true self. So this is truly who you are, and it starts from conception. Your parents thinking about having you, and then sometimes things happen along the way, whether it's during utero, even during pregnancy. If during pregnancy your mom had to go through very stressful events, perhaps she was also receiving abuse, or say, for example, if she had her own challenges along the way, and she didn't know as well how to regulate herself and her system, that causes stress as well to the fetus, of course, in utero. And sometimes trauma starts in utero. If you think about, I don't know, babies who had the umbilical cord wrapped around their neck, that's how some forms of developmental trauma start to happen. And then, it might cause different symptoms along the lines in adulthood as well. Premature babies, their first literally days after being born are being in an incubator, feeling in pain, not being able to say anything, full of needles, and being already in survival, feeling that survival stress. And if these things are not then taken care of, it can show it with in adulthood and in childhood as well, with different symptoms. So we're talking about bipolar disorder, personality disorders, speech delay disorders. We are talking about anxiety, depression, being very hypersensitive to light and sound, being very aggressive, autism, ADHD. So, these are all symptoms of the root cause itself, which is unresolved stored trauma. So that's how you start to develop your survival self, which is essentially that part of you who is just simply trying to survive from whatever threat or danger there was at that moment. And sometimes when we deal with developmental trauma, when we deal with survival stress that then show up also with different body and physical conditions, goes back into generations because it's stored in our DNA. And sometimes it goes back to 3 generations back. If we think about, our grandparents or our great-grandparents, what they were doing, perhaps they were in war, maybe they had PTSD and they didn't know it. So if they weren't able, if they had to go through their own challenges as well, and they had their moments of dysregulation, and they didn't know how to deal with that, and they didn't have enough safety, it gets passed on because it's stored in our DNA. So we might also feel symptoms sometimes, and we don't even know why. We feel a bit off, or we don't necessarily know why certain things happen to us. And the reality is that sometimes it gets passed on from nervous system to nervous system. So sometimes it's why being here and learning about nervous system education is one of the ways then to create neural pathways that are helpful not just for us, but also for the collective, for your children, and for the next generation as well. Because if you teach that to your children and your children know as well, they develop a stronger and healthier sense of self because of you, then they will pass that on to a different generation. So it's about shifting the pattern, creating new neural pathways, and we're talking about neuroplasticity here because our brain is capable of changing. And when we talk about survival self, our sense of self, especially after trauma, is always fragmented into different parts of consciousness. So I like to say this to my clients all the time, because all of your parts are always welcome. And sometimes, you know, we tend to criticize some of our parts that we tend to reject because we think that they're not lovable. And the reality is that all of these parts, they're here for a reason, and most of the time they're here because they're on board to keep us alive, to keep us safe, because they act as self-protection for when we detect danger or threat. Especially if we, you know, if we're so used to be so hyper vigilant and perceive threat or danger everywhere based on our past experiences, because we didn't feel safe, of course, you know, our operating system is going to come into place, our autonomic nervous system is going to come into place, and it's going to try and keep us safe. And these are where our survival parts come into place as well. So what I said before, when we talk about fight, fly, and freeze, examples of ways you might be in that specific state is, let's just say, for example, with our fight response, which most of the time it's almost like an attack. It means that you're vigilant. Sometimes you're also hyper vigilant. So you might feel angry, judgmental, mistrustful, you know, needs to control the external environment, needs to control, you know, the people around you, because you don't feel safe internally. And that's also how you develop sometimes this kind of relational ambivalence with people, where you don't know anymore what's real and what's not. Shall I trust this person? Shall I not trust this person? But the reality is that sometimes it's about, first of all, learning to develop a stronger sense of self and trusting ourselves first. And sometimes, yes, it's also about feeling suicidal. So the fight response is part of our sympathetic nervous system, as well as the flight response. And it really is, it's what puts us into mobilization. That's what it is. We've got so much energy in the body that we've got to do something about it. We've got to fight, we've got to attack, we've got to flee, we've got to get out of here, and we need to mobilize. We have this like sense of urgency. Our flight response, as I said before, is like running away, it's an escape. So when we say you might be a runner, I'm thinking about relationships. You know, are you committed? Are you not committed? Do you tend to have one foot in the relationship, one foot out, because you're always there on the go? You're always like, I don't know if I can trust this person. So, you know, I don't know if I can fully commit because I don't know myself enough, and I'm afraid. I have this kind of, perhaps I have a fear of abandonment, a fear of rejection. Therefore, I kind of want to be here, but I also have one foot on the door just in case there is threat. So you're already in that kind of hypervigilant mode all the time. Or perhaps, as I mentioned before, you have ambivalence, or you're addictive, or it shows as well as eating disorders. The freeze response, yes, it's connected to fear. So most of the time, when I say that we feel frozen, imagine it being, the freeze response is a bit of a mix between having a bit of the fight and flight, so a bit of the sympathetic charge, let's say, in terms of the, you know, energy in our body, but not wanting or not being capable of escaping. So this is why, if what I explained before, if we found ourselves in a situation in the past or even as a child where it wasn't safe for us to attack, if it wasn't safe for us to react and show our anger, because perhaps if we showed anger, you know, it would be detrimental to our safety. Maybe we were hit, you know, physically, or maybe there was emotional abuse. Then if something dangerous happens to us, we go into this freeze response where we, you know, we're terrified. We just can't move. We have so much energy inside, but we just can't do anything about it. So we're kind of a little stuck. We're kind of stuck, and you're like, yes, I have so much energy. I should do this now. I must do it now, but also I can't do it. So yeah, and sometimes we do feel wary, terrified, and it shows up as well as panic attacks. The other two, submit, so as in when we start to feel, yes, it's connected to shame, but it's also when we start feeling a little bit more into this self-abandoning state. So it can come up as depressed, ashamed, self-hatred. So there's a lot of rejection of ourselves. Sometimes maybe we're a bit numb. We don't feel much about ourselves. Self-sacrificing, caretaker, people-pleasing, which is also, it's another response that maybe it's not always talked about as much, but it's called the fawn response, which is pretty much, it's when we, you know, we tend to kind of change our internal state based on someone else's reaction and internal state. So perhaps it was safer for us to take care of our parents or a caregiver, or it was safer to please them and take care of their emotional reactions because it was the only way for us to be safe, because maybe they were so unpredictable that we always had to tiptoe around and trade on eggshells. So we just constantly had to be wary and look at their reactions, and whatever it was happening, then we had to change our internal state just so we can stay safe. And that's how we then tend to develop people-pleasing tendencies in our life, in our relationships, and we tend to kind of abandon ourselves a little bit. And then attachment, cry for help. So it might happen sometimes that even in relationships, there are moments where we feel like we fear rejection, we fear abandonment, and we desperately, you know, want someone to rely on, to depend on. It can show up as well, almost like as a protest, almost like if you know, you throw a tantrum and you feel like you do want that connection. And sometimes you know, you ask yourself, you know, perhaps how old am I in this moment? And maybe we feel like we're 5, maybe we feel like we're 6. So it's kind of this really like deep, vulnerable state of just crying for that help and for that attachment. And as I said before, these are all very valid survival parts of us, that they're here for a reason, and we can learn how to work with them. You know, sometimes there is this tendency, even like almost culturally, to reject all the time, or to feel shame around something. And the reality is that it's just part of being human. So there is definitely the chance to just learn to be more compassionate about it and learn how to work with these parts. So in order to release stored trauma, it's important to work on discharging this survival energy through safe co-regulation, attunement, and restoration of our internal embodied experience. So there's a difference between self-regulation and co-regulation. So, and again, when I talk about regulation, I talk about the just natural state of our nervous system that goes into sympathetic and parasympathetic, sympathetic and parasympathetic. Sometimes what happens is that if we're constantly looking for threat, if we're always feeling anxious and hypervigilant, or we're feeling stressed because work is just like, it's too much and we're always overriding, you know, our system, then we might tend to stay in that sympathetic state a little bit too much. So instead of being sympathetic, parasympathetic, it might just be sympathetic for over a longer period of time, and then we drop down into parasympathetic. So that's the normal regulation of the nervous system. Self-regulation is about learning how to attune to our own needs and to what our body needs at the moment, attune to our own nervous system on our own. When we are on our own, by ourselves, we start feeling safe. We might find different regulating tools that help us feel safer internally and in our own environment. Co-regulation is when we do it together with someone else. So, for example, when I'm in the safe space with my clients, I am the safe, I basically represent safety for them, and we are co-regulating. When you're with your children and you're very playful together, you're co-regulating all the time. When you're with a friend, with your loved ones, so that is co-regulation. You do it with someone else. And so this is essentially how our line of defenses and how trauma is relived. So the event occurs, or multiple events occur. What happens is then it starts to overwhelm our body and our system. So again, as I said before, we might feel, you know, we start to feel a bit hypervigilant or anxious, and we feel like we're in danger and we need to whether attack or not attack, or whether we can run away or not. And it happens too much and too soon. So you're like, whoa, okay, my system is just not ready for it. Then what happens is that our autonomic nervous system acts as protection. So our operating system, our team is saying, okay, no worries. You're in danger. I'm going to come and help you. And I'm gonna gather all of this survival energy to come and protect you, so then I can keep you safe. I can keep you safe and alive. Based on that, your behavioral response is different. So what happens is that you might start feeling a little bit more angry, because obviously your autonomic nervous system, which happens most of the time, you know, we can't control it. It's automatic at the end of the day, but you know, our autonomic nervous system is just there to kind of help you mobilize. Therefore you respond. So you become angry, or, you know, perhaps you decide to run away, or, you know, whatever it is that is happening, your behavior just starts to change and respond differently. And when your behavior starts to respond differently, you start to feel an increase in your activation in terms of like how you feel in your nervous system, and therefore your thoughts start to change. So you have already kind of made up your mind with what that experience means to you. And this is why most of the time, when we notice that our thoughts start to change, perhaps, you know, our thoughts start to get either a little darker, or we start to think, oh, you know, I can't do this. I feel like I'm not good enough. I feel like, you know, nobody gets me. I feel like I really would like to do this, but I can't. I really can't step into what I desire. Most of the time it happens because of our dysregulated nervous system. And this is what I'm saying, you can't talk this out of it, because it's has to do with our sensation. It has to do with our felt sense. And most of the time it's because we are, again, as I said before, like if something happened to us in the past and we just couldn't process it and we couldn't discharge the energy, every time something similar happens, even if we're not in real danger, our protective parts and our autonomic nervous system is still gonna come into place, and it's still gonna tell us, oh no, you're in danger, therefore I need to keep you safe. So here's your fight response, here's your flight response, here how you're gonna go into freeze because you can't fight and you can't flee, if that kind of makes sense. Okay, so to understand a little bit more of what happens with our beautiful autonomic nervous system, which again, just remember, this is our body just works so perfectly with this, and yeah, so just a reminder of just celebrating it, but also to understand how we can deal with activation in a different way. So this is actually the autonomic nervous system ladder, in terms of there are different states of our autonomic nervous system. The first one is what is called the ventral vagal complex, which is essentially the first one here with this little guy that looks really happy. So this is our safe social engagement. So it's when we feel happy, we feel joyful, we feel like, oh, okay, you know, everything is fine. You know, my cup of tea is not too hot, it's not too cold, it's good temperature. I am ready to connect. I'm connecting with my friends, I'm connecting with my loved ones, with my children. So that's generally how we feel when we're just ready to socialize and engage, and we feel good within ourselves, we feel good with our external environment as well. So it says it here, the attitude is, I am feeling at ease, I can manage whatever comes my way. I feel empowered and connected. I see the big picture and connect to the world and the people in it. And if you notice, sometimes, you know, that's a good homework to start noticing. But when you are in this space, when you are in this state, most of the time it's easier to also get things done, be more productive, and just achieve what we want to achieve, because we feel so regulated and we feel, you know, we feel safe internally. And then it shifts and we move into the sympathetic nervous system. So what I said before, this kind of puts us into mobilization. So they're fight or flight, where we feel hypervigilant, agitated, angry, anxious, frantic, you know, a bit fidgety. We just need to do things because I've got so much energy. And sometimes we're quite nervous as well. And the attitude is, I'm getting overwhelmed and having a hard time keeping up. I feel anxious and irritated. The world seems dangerous, chaotic, and unfriendly. And then the third one is called the dorsal vagal complex, where it brings us into immobility, shutdown, and into freeze. So as I said before, it's where we feel like we're alone. Perhaps we want to step into what we desire, but we feel like we can't. Like, I just have no capacity whatsoever for this. I am not good enough. I don't know what to do. And you notice it as well in the way you respond from a body perspective, because if you think about it, we sometimes tend to go almost like into this collapse. So it's like, you know, our chest sinks in, our shoulders, and we kind of just want to like collapse into it. Maybe we don't even feel as much heat. You know, for example, if we were in a sympathetic activation, we probably feel quite a lot of heat, maybe in your face, maybe you feel heat in your legs, in your hands, because you're just ready to attack. But if not, in our dorsal vagal activation, usually we just feel pretty numb. And sometimes it goes so extreme that we completely dissociate from. So we don't feel our body anymore. We're not here, but we're not really here. So we just don't feel anything. So again, what I'm sharing today mainly is the first step is to recognize the state of your nervous system. So identify the sensations, the images, the feelings, and the thoughts. So, and I would say a good homework that you can take home with you in terms of just practicing for yourself is, you know, first of all, recognizing in which state you're in and just practice with that, and just notice, okay, you know, sometimes I might feel at the moment a little bit of this sympathetic charge. I kind of feel a little bit worried, a little bit anxious. And then sometimes the activation is really strong. So you're like, okay, I feel really angry. I feel really anxious now. And I've got to do this. And then I've got to pick up my kids to school. And then I've got to call my friend. And then you know what I mean? It really feels like, oh my God, I can't breathe. And I've got so much to do. And I need to energy. I need to mobilize. And then, you know, everything just feels a little bit too much. And you're constantly overriding your system. And as I said before, one of the sensations could be that you feel warm, you feel heat, you know, you might feel a bit breathless as well, you feel nervous. Well, for example, when we are in the ventral vagal state, so we are in our social engagement and connecting, you know, we're just present, we've got a nice color on our face, we're just laughing, we're joyful, we're playful, we're chatting, and we just feel pretty calm, pretty present, and wanting to do things, wanting to, you know, step towards things that are interesting to us as well. We're quite curious about others, curious about the world. And just notice, just every time you are in those states, just start practicing and notice what sensations, what images, you know, perhaps you want to associate a color or shape or texture to the sensations. Any particular feelings associated to that, as well as your thoughts, because as we said before, your thoughts change according to your nervous system state. So, and this is a classic example, as I said before, if we are into our dorsal vagal complex, in our dorsal shutdown, we feel numb and we start to collapse. Perhaps I am feeling cold. Perhaps I'm feeling a little bit spacey. Perhaps I am feeling a little bit nauseous as well. Oh, sorry. There are some fireworks going on. Hang on a second. Anybody with dogs, the fireworks? What I was saying as well is, you know, notice in that state when you start to feel numb and shut down, what your thoughts are. And most of the time the thoughts are, oh, I can't do this. No one is there for me. I'm all alone. And you get into this really like collapse state of complete immobility. And the way to come out of this is very subtle. So it's about learning how to come out of these states and learning about how can we attune, and we attune by identify the state, identify the sensations, images, feelings, and thoughts, then finding regulating tools that can help us come out of this state. And most of the time, you know, if we start from the dorsal vagal shutdown, so we start in a freeze response, so we feel numb and we collapse. In order to come out of the state, we have to move first into our fight and flight response. So we have to move into the flight, then into the fight, and then we come back into the ventral vagal, into social engagement and connection. So, but the first step is to identify what state you're in. So these are just examples of regulating tools. If I have time, I wanted to kind of share something quickly, because there's a bit of a difference between regulating tools that are helping us coming out of this state in a much healthier way, comparing then coping strategies that we have developed over time to regulate ourselves, but are not necessarily helpful for our internal safety. But again, these are just examples of regulating tools. I always recommend just finding what works best for you, but most of the time, you know, calling a loved one, or, you know, meditation or mindfulness, or perhaps cooking, because you're working with the textures and sensations, the smells, and it's a way of bringing yourself back, maybe up to a little bit of that sympathetic charge, a little bit of, you know, that nice activation where you feel a bit more alive in your body. Spending time in nature, any sort of movement, especially say if you do feel you have a bit of that sympathetic charge and you're like, oh, I've got this energy, I feel a bit worried, but you know, I've got this energy going on and I feel like I need to mobilize. What would be good for me right now to discharge this energy is to move. Maybe you want to exercise, maybe you want to do some yoga, maybe you're going for a run, and just notice the shift. Notice the shift as well in your thoughts, in your thought process after that. Notice how you're relating to yourself and to the world, to your colleagues, to your children. You know, notice if you feel any different sensations. Maybe sometimes, you know, when we feel a little bit more into the dorsal vagal, so we feel numb and we feel like going into this shutdown, we need to be very gentle with ourselves. So perhaps you might want to gently feel your body. So either giving yourself a hug and just gently pressing to feel your bones, your skin, your muscle, kind of giving you a sense that, you know, there is a bit of a sense of aliveness there. Maybe you need a hot water bottle as well, or feeling like the weight of the weight of a nice cozy blanket wrapping you up and just staying in your nice cocoon. Maybe that's what you need at that time. It could be being playful with your children. Sometimes a good regulating way as well is if you have a TV series where you really resonate with some of the characters, then that's a way of regulating too, because sometimes not necessarily you might feel the desire to call someone to talk, and sometimes, you know, you want to try and regulate on your own. So it really depends on what works best for you. Sometimes humming as well helps, especially when we feel a bit numb and a bit shut down, because it kind of helps as well to bring up a little bit of more activation back up and feel a bit more alive. As well as music and orienting to the space around you, which is pretty much the exercise that we did before. So these are just examples, but again, just find what works best for you. Most of the time it's just through practice and just noticing and then starting to like practice on attuning to your own needs in that specific moment. And as I said before, the key is to take small steps that help us come back to our internal safety so that we feel safe enough to connect and step towards what we truly desire rather than feeling stuck. The step is subtle, but it brings enough activation for us to handle and learn that we're safe enough to take that step. This is what helps our nervous system to become more flexible and resilient. So if, you know, unresolved trauma stored in our body most of the time causes us to have a very rigid nervous system. But when we learn to work with these different states of our system, and we learn to come out of the state in a quicker way, rather than getting stuck there, and then not knowing what to do, and not knowing what's happening for us internally, when we learn to do that, then, as I said before, we are creating these new neural pathways, which also means that our nervous system is a little bit more flexible. So we know different tools, we know how to work with it. And yeah, mainly the final thing, this is probably for another whole session for another time, because I don't want to keep you for longer, but I mean, very quickly, something that it's very important to take into consideration as well is the importance of our adrenal glands, which sit just on top of our kidneys, and they're essentially, you know, right behind the last two ribs of our rib cage. So pretty much they're like in our, you know, around our mid back. And our kidneys, adrenals are the organs in our body that are associated with safety and fear. So they're one of the primal responses to detect threat and keep us safe from threat as well. So they're very responsible for our survival. Your kidney adrenals have been with you since you were in utero, when you were born and you were a baby, when you were a child, when you were a teenager, to your development, to obviously where you are right now in your life. Your kidney adrenals always work for your survival, and they work to keep you safe, to keep you alive, to keep you well. The problem is that when we stay in this survival stress and in this survival mode for a longer period of time, without, as I said before, without finding the correct regulation for ourselves, our kidney adrenals tend to overfunction or underfunction, and this is how, you know, inflammation starts to happen in the body as well. And sometimes when we talk about, for example, chronic lower back pain, that could be a symptom of an overfunctioning kidney adrenals, because the adrenals essentially, they work so hard that they start to pull up all of the little muscles around it, because they're also next to our organs, such as, you know, the pancreas, the spleen, the liver, and the inferior vena cava as well. So, and the diaphragm, of course. So, but what happens is that, you know, all of the little muscles along the spine, they start to contract, because the kidney adrenals are like, oh my God, we're working so hard to keep you so safe, you know, because there is threat, even if there isn't an actual threat or danger, but, you know, we need to keep you alive. And then boom, like all of the little muscles pull up, because all of the muscles are like, okay, so the body has to tense up. So then we are ready to attack, because it's primal. So then we are ready to fight. So then we are ready to flee. And that's pretty much what happens. And this is why, you know, it's important, and often it's talked about, healing from adrenal fatigue, because sometimes inflammation happens in our body, and then, you know, when we're feeling chronically fatigued, we might have some sparks of energy here and there, but we generally feel really tired all the time, chronic lower back pain. And it could be probably because our kidney adrenals are just working so hard. And sometimes it's about looking after them. Obviously, if you would like to know more about it, I am more than happy, because I do work a lot with the organs with my clients. So we work a lot with finding different tools of regulation. So we work through the body co-regulation together, as well as placing our intention and also touch when I work in person with the different organs as well. So something that you can do by yourself, if you like, is to have a hot water bottle that you can then wrap around a towel. Maybe don't fill it up all the way to the top. You can keep it, you know, maybe up to like half. And you can place it on your mid back, and you just lie down maybe for 20 minutes or so. You can even imagine your kidney adrenals kind of floating into water, and just kind of letting your body sink in, and just let, you know, your body just feeling the weight of your body, and just rest for 20 minutes or so. The heat kind of it recreates the amniotic fluid in the womb, obviously when your mom was pregnant. So It's about supporting with care your kidney adrenal glands that do tons of work, really a lot of work to keep you safe. So yeah, so that's me done for tonight with this. Obviously, as I said, like, I think the most important thing is to really being able to recognize in which state you're in first, and then slowly build over time your regulating toolkit. Some things, of course, you can do on your own. Some things is best done with a professional or with a loved one in a safe container. It really depends on where you're at in your life and the challenges that you are facing. But yeah, so if you have any questions, of course, feel free to ask questions. As I said, I'm taking clients one-on-one on this. If you would like to dive a little bit deeper and kind of, you know, heal from the nervous system perspective and start healing your body and understand a little bit more what goes on a somatic level, and understanding as well a bit about, you know, our past and why certain events and sensations then as symptoms come up in adulthood as well. And also, you know, of course, you know, this is a great way to educate yourself with around nervous system, so then you can also educate your children, because this is not talked about, you know, through doctors and NHS, and I'm pretty sure it's not talked about in school either, and I think that will benefit massively in the world that we live in at the moment, to be honest. So yeah, so I'm gonna stop sharing the screen. So yeah, as I said, if you do have any questions, I'm seeing the comments now. I keep hearing about weighted blanket. I really want to get one. Yes, they're great for dogs as well. If you do have a dog, I'm thinking about getting one for my dog. Really anxious, yes, that I went to sleep under and didn't wake up, feel rested, then I woke up. But that's amazing. I love what you were saying, really resilient. Thank you so much for the information tonight. Well, thank you so much for your comments. Yeah, I really appreciate it. As I said, if you have any questions even after the event, you can contact me. So my website is www.redfoxcandle.com. It's where I offer, my offerings are, of course, the candles, but also the coaching. And you can contact me at hello@redfoxcandle.com. So even if you would like to have a